Greetings, welcome to part 2 of the shoe shine video. This video is going to be a little more specific in terms of shining technique. The first video, part 1, was a little bit more of general shoe shining. So if you haven't watched part 1, go check it out. So to get started, when you're getting ready to shine your shoe, you want to try to make sure that it's cleaned off first, right? Dirt, debris, whatever, especially if you haven't shined them for a long time. The brush is a good thing for that. And as I mentioned in video 1, part of the purpose of that is so that the polish will get into the leather and work into the leather better. So make sure that you clean it. Now, in terms of specific technique for shining, when you're using your different tools on the shoe, okay, so you have your brush, you have your special shining cloth, you have old t-shirt, okay? There's different techniques that you can use with each tool, all right? For example, when you're using the brush, okay, you've got your shoe, you want to kind of hit it like that, right? You're just kind of getting it from different angles like that. You don't want to just necessarily rub on it like that. Part of the trick for using the brush is just sort of, you're not glancing the shoe per se, but you're not also grinding it in, and you just kind of fast, motion like that. And try to hit it from multiple angles as well, okay? So for example, once you have your polish applied, you can use the brush right after you apply the polish. So you apply the polish, kind of let it dry, and then you can take your brush right out. Especially if you're just doing sort of a maintenance shine, that's a good way to do it. The brush is really handy for that type of thing, or if you have applied your polish, you have worked it in, and then you take your rag and you kind of buff it, then you can go back over with this. I like to apply polish, work it in, let it dry, go back over with a rag, which is going to be the next part that I get to. Polish it with the rag and then hit it with the brush. Usually if I'm going to do another coat of polish is when I'll do that. So moving on, in the last video I talked about some people have an actual like shoe shine little kit that has like a wooden stand where your shoe sits and it's all nice and comfortable. Some people have different little places to set their shoe, okay? If you're just regular guy shining in your living room or whatever, you can just clasp it between your knees so that it's sitting there. Take your rag, all right, your shoe shine rag there. And the technique with this rag is similar to the brush, right? Kind of, you're not really like pulling in. There's a place for that to really get into it, but especially like again for just a maintenance shine or whatever, just kind of hit it like that, right? And you'd be surprised. I mean, even if you haven't applied polish, if you do that with the brush or with the rag, you'll start to see a difference. So that's another good maintenance technique. Like I said in the first video, you spit on it a little bit, or dab some water on it. I do that at various stages throughout the shining process, and it just kind of gives some moisture to the leather. Whether or not saliva has any adverse effects on the shoe, I don't really know. I haven't looked that up. I've never had an issue with it. But anyways, so that's kind of some of the technique with this shining cloth. And then kind of old school way, using an old t-shirt. This technique is good for applying the polish. I recommend, if you're applying the polish, that you kind of use this technique, and then also like buffing the polish out after it's dried. So when you're applying the polish, get a little bit on your finger on your old t-shirt here, and then start working it in tiny concentric circles, right? Just tiny, 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 and just work it in. That the whole phase of putting the polish on the shoe, you're working the polish into the leather, okay? As I mentioned, I like to use a lighter to heat up the leather, and it helps the leather to absorb the polish, to get it in there. I believe because leather is technically like skin, so it has pores. Heat opens up the pores, right? So you work the leather into the pores, and it holds the shine better. But the point being, with this, whether you're applying the polish or you're buffing the polish out, tiny, tiny circles. Like I said in the first video, it's just time. The longer you take and the more care you give to shining your shoe, the better it's going to look, the longer it's going to last. So that's kind of the technique, the fine point technique of applying the polish with a rag or an old shirt, and then buffing it out. The last thing that I want to talk about is in terms of using the lighter technique. I put on the last video in the little comments section or whatever, make sure that if you're using the lighter technique, that you're doing it in a ventilated area, that you're not just inhaling, burnt fumes, because it will have a scent when you do that method. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I sort of assumed, would be common sense, but I want to mention it just in case. When you're doing the lighter technique, all right, when you're heating up the leather with the lighter, you don't want to hold, you're not cooking your shoe or anything like that, right? When you're using the lighter technique, you just kind of pass it like that. I don't even always have the flame actually touch the leather. Just, kind of have it hovering above the leather, right? Definitely don't just sit there and hold it in one spot. That will not help things, so don't do that. So that's a little bit with the lighting there. Other than that, just make sure, the last thing is, when you are doing your shoes, make sure that you get down in the crevices there, right? Using the polishing rag, you're not really going to get down in there. You take your finger, and the same thing, little concentric circles as much as you can, and then you can do kind of like some wiping like that. Anyways, so there that is, the finer point techniques of shoe shining. And again, the key is just go slow and take your time, and you're conditioning the leather, you're protecting the leather, and you're making it look good. So take your time, work it in there, get a good shine. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.